Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Humanitarian Assistance. Doesn't that trip off the tongue neatly? We're going to talk about Haiti today, but we're also going to contextualize Haiti and ask the question, how do we stop another Haiti happening? Compare Haiti with the Chinese earthquake of a few years ago and the difference in the level of damage, but also the government response, the dependence on outside assistance. In the work that we've been doing on the Global Agenda Council, we've actually summarized our whole problem as being, how do we have fewer Haitis and more Chinas? If we're going to have natural disasters at all, we need somehow or other to increase preparedness and have more practice and more stocks and better systems and better structures, so that when earthquakes happen, as they will, we don't have the level of devastation and pain that we've seen in Haiti. We want to use this session to look at that question, to look at the partnerships that can be built between the private and the public sectors, and then to move forward proactively to talk a little bit about actions that we might take together to build the capacity in developing countries that will make the next Haiti less likely. And there's a session in the Ideas Lab this afternoon at which we'll be talking about the recommendations of the Global Agenda Council, so it'd be great if you came to that. You'll find a copy of the report of the Council and our two-page summary for this Davos on the table outside. And if anybody would like to be involved or would like more information, Olivia Bessat, who's standing at the back and would wave, Olivia is the person to talk to, or of course to me, and we'd be really delighted to have more help and participation. The panel we have today brings a huge amount of experience, some of it of Haiti, some less directly, but all of it absolutely central to this issue. Catherine Bragg is on my left. She is the Deputy UN Coordinator for Humanitarian Affairs and is standing in for Sir John Holmes, who is very tied up. But Catherine, I heard you speak yesterday. You have absolutely up-to-date information and a very broad vision on this. We're really delighted you're here. Nicolas Mariscal Torroella is chairman of the board of the Grupo Marhnos in Mexico, is in the construction sector and absolutely understands how to make sure that we have stronger buildings and better codes and better institutions to support those codes. He'll talk about that. Madame Sadako Ogata, of course, former UN High Commissioner for refugees and currently president of the Japan International Cooperation Agency, a titan amongst those of us who work in development and an icon and somebody who will bring a great deal also of practical experience. Cameron Sinclair, co-founder and executive director of Architecture for Humanity, a young global leader, again very involved in how architects and engineers and planners can be mobilized to deal with these emergencies. And we're hoping to be joined by Dame Barbara Stocking, who's chief executive of Oxfam GB. My expectation is that the experience on the panel is matched by the experience in the room. So let me just ask you, first of all, just so that we know who's here, if you're in this development humanitarian world from either the agencies or from the NGOs, please put up your hand. If you're from the private sector, please put up your hand. Right, we know where the target is outside the room in that case. And the rest of you are either too modest to declare your interest or we will sign you up as supporters later. Let me quickly start by asking the panel not to give us a speech, please, but just to give us maximum 2 minutes on these key questions. What do we learn? What do we take away to make sure that we don't have more Haitis? How do we involve the private sector? Let me start with you, Catherine, please.
I think it's too early to have lessons learned from Haiti. You know, we're only 2 weeks into this, but we certainly have learned a lot of lessons from tsunami, Pakistan earthquake, Myanmar cyclone, etc. Main things we have learned from the humanitarian response point of view is that we've got to get organized, we've got to be coordinated, and in the last 5 years, we've made a lot of changes in terms of how we actually organize ourselves. I won't bore you guys into the technical jargon of things like clusters. We have also, I think in the last 5 years, really evolved our thinking in terms of involvement of the military as first responder, as well as our thinking in terms of the private sector. Not just as private sectors having a lot of money, they have it, we don't, we want some of it. Not from that kind of thinking, but in understanding that there are things they do better than anybody else within the activities that needs to take place in humanitarian response, such as, obvious example, telecommunications. NGOs can't do it well, governments can't do it well, multilateral organizations can't do it well. Private sector does that much better than anybody else. There are things they do more efficiently, such as airport handling. DHL at the moment is in Dominican Republic helping with the airport handling for the Haitian response because they are very efficient at that sort of thing. So we're now revising our mentality as to how we actually work with both the private sector and the military. 10 years ago, we used to think of them as the bad guys. Now we're thinking of them very differently. So I think we've learned a lot of lessons in the last 5 years from the major disasters. I will yield the floor to others.
If you've been starting in Haiti
10
years ago, and you'd known there might be an earthquake in the future, what are the 2 or 3 things that you would have absolutely insisted on in your conversations with the agencies and with the government?
Where I would start is this disaster is the first mega humanitarian crisis in an urban setting. We have never seen something like this in an urban setting before. Urbanization is actually what is characterizing this particular response, and the last 10 years of urbanization into Port-au-Prince with the earthquake is how we have the catastrophic dimension that we have today. So I think dealing with urbanization is very, very important. And we're going to see more of this because with climate change, we know the compounding effect of increasing urbanization and the climate change is where we're going to have more and more of the Port-au-Prince situation. And I think that needs to be stressed.
In absence, we're delighted to see you here. We're just running along the panel, 2 minutes each, key lessons and key things to take forward from Haiti. Nicolas, Mexico has lots of earthquakes, but doesn't seem to have this level of devastation, so you're doing something different, I guess.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. I'm glad this morning. I would like to share with you where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the private sector, been involved for more than 40 years. I'm coming from the construction and engineering field. I would like to share with you, coming from a family company, more than 5 generations, but to share with you, I got involved with this because with the DRN, that's an initiative that got started here in Davos in 2001, when it was an earthquake in India, in Gujarat. And we started there with engineering and construction in something that's called DRN, now it's called Disaster Resource Partnership. What we're doing now in Mexico, as you know, it's a place where we have many, many earthquakes. But just to tell you very briefly, what are we doing in Mexico? In Mexico, we got involved in something, it's called United for Them. United for Them, it's Unidos por Ellos. It's a group of more than 200 companies in the private sector. And what we're doing, the way that we work, it's in a public-private partnership. And right now, we're working in Haiti too. And we were able to get involved, I hope, with some of these ideas will work in other places in the world. One of the, we work like the petals, and each petal of the flowers in which we're involved are, for example, the universities. The universities are a great place to work in. They have the humanitarian side for volunteers. So what we're doing now in Haiti, and also we have done it in the past, we work very close in relation, because one of the first things we have to do is get involved our people in our companies. And the way we do it is by matching funds. We have to get involved from the highest level in the company to the lowest level. So we started with the employers and the general managers and so forth with the matching funds. And then the other thing very important is to be a corporate social responsible company. We have to work with the communities where we work. So in the construction industry, I think we have a lot to give to all the places we're working, but not just as donors, to be also givers. We have to be involved into the projects and think in the long term. That's what we're doing right now. And in Mexico, we've been working also along with the civil engineers and also with the construction industry. Thank you.
Just to go back to my initial question, when Mexico has an earthquake, you don't have the level of devastation. What's the difference?
Well, the difference, I think, it's point of view that we've been prepared now, especially for the seismic side. We have been working along for many, many years, along with the civil engineering schools and the way we design the construction, the building itself, I think that's the reason I think we've been able to come along all these disasters that have happened.
Very good. It's just worth saying, by the way, that when Josette Sheeran was on this platform yesterday, she was showing the various high-density foods that are being distributed in Haiti, and some of them come from factories in Mexico, which are scaling up. So there's also a very interesting regional dimension to this Haiti response that we might want to come back to. Mrs. Ogata.
Thank you very much. I'm Sadako Ogata. I was for 10 years United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and in that capacity I did deal with a lot of Haitians leaving the country by boat and with the American government. Mr. Clinton was there trying to stop the Haitians from all arriving in Miami, and they were interdicted, had to go to Cuba, and we had to go and help try to figure out who deserves being taken in and who deserves to be sent back. That kind of thing I know Haiti from a humanitarian crisis point of view. Now, the question is, after that, I am currently president of Japan International Cooperation Agency, which is a development agency, from technical assistance to yen loans and so on. The big difference between humanitarian assistance and development assistance, to me, in development assistance, you do have to deal with emergency, you look at people, you look at speed in order to alleviate the suffering, humanitarian crisis and suffering. But development agencies have to deal with the government and the state, trying to bring the whole state and society and state into a much more developing phase. And so in this sense, the timing concept is different, and the purpose at the end may converge, but it's different. And while I was High Commissioner for Refugees, I looked at the development agency saying, so slow, why can't you come in much more quickly and get your development work moving quickly? And then I realized that there is such a thing as a state. With development agency, cannot disregard the state and just start building the country. Humanitarian, to a certain extent, can override that and try to deal with the people suffering right away. So there is that difference in speed and the basic responsibility, but I think today the two are getting closer. And the humanitarian coming in and also bringing in the development at an earlier stage this is called peace building efforts and so on. I think there's more of that. So in that sense, I think there's more hope for the part when you look at the situation of the people suffering. I think they don't care whether it's humanitarian or development, so long as they are met, their needs are met at the right time, the right way. So that's my overall. But if you want me to say something about Haiti? No, later. All right. Haiti is, and I do have, is responsible for emergency medical teams and some emergency relief teams. And with Haiti, it was the fourth day when my 20 medical teams arrived in it. It was considered very slow. Now, with China, the relations within China is a very important sovereign state. Whether they would accept all the emergency relief work, we were not sure, but they did. And we did a very, very big job in Shenzhen and that huge earthquake crisis. Japan is an earthquake country. And it's a country that it's almost every day there's small earthquakes. But we do have teams now quite well organized to do international work. But what these can do in one place is different from what it can do in another place, depending on the receptivity of the state, depending on how much access is possible. From Japan to get to Haiti was not easy, because we had to go to Miami, where we do have some storages, to get there first, and then another plane to go from Miami on to Port-au-Prince and so on. So those are all sorts of differences, but the one big difference is that Haiti as a state was not a strong one. China as a state is very, very strong. So how do you work out these emergency assistance, humanitarian assistance? Depends a little bit on the state situation and the relations between states.
Pictures cycling as we came into the room of the devastation in Haiti. And as you've rightly said, the government was decapitated in many ways. And yet we all talk about building back better and building development into relief. Do you think it's feasible, and this is also going to be a question for the last two speakers, in that kind of devastation, are we just dreaming if we talk about trying to do long-term development?
Just for Haiti, the emergency medical teams from my office will be leaving, and then there's the self-defense forces sending a bigger team to do emergency medical and so on. But I am already sending a team of experts of development assistance, and they should be arriving in the next few days. But the question is, what do you do? Water supply, the setup of rebuilding schools and houses. And the assessment team will be going and first figure out at what stage and according to what needs we can really help the country rebuild. So it's a slower, different process.
answer to my question is, but it's a difficult answer, isn't it? Why don't you talk a little bit about how you would deal with that problem?
What's interesting about the development world, so our organization is what's kind of being known as a tugboat NGO. When you look at development, there's different sizes of agencies. And, you know, in the past, there was almost competing forces. But I think in recent disasters, and certainly our organization represent about 40,000 building professionals in 100 countries, and we have chapters in 70 cities. All of our work is open source, so we collaborate and work together and not only share best practices, but worst practices. And I think that's another problem in the NGO industry, is we're not willing to openly admit our failures. And as a result, the financial burden of that. One of the things that we've been doing, and we put out a reconstruction plan about a week ago, really is a way to kind of stop people flying in from all over the world, you know, with their suitcases and their hearts on their sleeves, you know, to come and help, because they really do hinder that first response effort. And, you know, many of us that are in that long-term reconstruction, you know, our time period is more like 4 months to 4 years, you know, and if we're not willing to commit to that and commit to the community, then I don't think that we're going to make an impactful response that not only responds to this disaster, but let's just remember that this isn't an earthquake. This is an earthquake with a hurricane about to happen in 4 months. And the current plan is to put 400,000 people in tents, right? I'm not seeing the numbers of dead and displaced right now. I'm seeing it post-hurricane season. And so that when we're looking at preparedness, we have to look at the risk levels. Haiti is in a high risk area. And to having partners on the ground and including them in that process. So, you know, for instance, we've been doing a coalition building amongst the young global leaders, as it turns out, as we began talking to each other, that at least, you know, 24 of us were already on the ground in Haiti for many years. And many of us had Haitian partners that we had been on the phone and using Skype every single day to communicate their needs and how we can respond. So, you know, we're a tugboat. And what I mean by that is, I'm not going to offend Oxfam, because actually in Sri Lanka, Oxfam took the lead on, they had an architect working for them, Sandra D'Ozo, who looked at the coordination and the collaboration between all of us and was instrumental in pushing that forward, making sure that every week that we weren't putting all our resources in one area and neglecting others. And so I see them as like, they're the oil tanker, right? They go from A to B and they get it done. And that what we can do is all these young, nimble organizations can collaborate with them to make sure that we implement building codes that are not only looking at this disaster, but looking at what Haiti looks like in 50 years, coupled with climate change issues, coupled with resource issues, and implementing a more localized response that incorporates the real experts, which are the Haitians, right? And the fact that there are professionals on the ground who are actively working, and social entrepreneurs who are looking to find ways to activate a job base out of the rebuilding and reconstruction era. So I think we have to look at the large aid response. We have to look at supporting local innovation and the ways that we can collaborate and make sure that we're not running roughshod and being perceived as kind of not listening to the local community.
It's talking about naval analogies for NGOs, but in the meantime, it's one thing to say, oh my God, they're intense and there's going to be a hurricane.
Right.
But at the moment, they're either not in anything or they're under a plastic sheet.
Sure.
So are you saying to people, don't send tents because actually they're not good enough? Surely not.
No, what I'm saying is that when we're doing transition, like an anchor in these communities, this is how FEMA screwed up. I mean, if you want to look at a disaster that is very similar, look at the reaction to Hurricane Katrina, because it was an unbelievable disaster based on the kind of ideas of let's put people all in, metal boxes and that they'll be fine when the hurricanes come through. That was not the case. What you have is you have these anchor nodes, schools, health clinics, community centers, making sure that they're all hurricane-resistant structures and they're disaster recovery centers just in case this happens. They're shelters. I mean, the irony and the sad irony is we'd spent the last 2 years working with local NGOs to do youth sports facilities that doubled as disaster recovery centers just in case of a large-scale disaster. We were going to start construction this year. So just imagine what the news reports were like for us when we had the plans, we're ready to roll. They're seismically sound buildings, but we're too late.
We'll come back to that, I'm sure. I think of Oxfam as being a flotilla of tugs, actually,
right,
with all the innovation and speed that you have.
Young and nimble as well. But anyway,
Exactly.
Your description of coordination was absolutely perfect. I mean, that is the way it should be and how we're trying to work. I was just going to make a couple of comments. One on, quickly, the general lessons, but then I was going to talk about the role of the private sector and what we've learnt in the last few years. On the general lessons, I think they've all sort of been mentioned, but I think it's worth adding them up. I mean, clearly we've learnt in the last few years, you really have to go for preparedness, disaster risk reduction. Sadly, in Haiti, a lot of us were doing it, but it absolutely overwhelmed what we were doing. But we'll still be able to pick that up because we've got loads of youth brigades digging latrines at the moment. That's what they're doing. So it's, we didn't have to start from scratch at least. There's clearly the building back better, and I do think you can do that. OCHA proved that was the case, whether it was shelter or people's livelihoods, economic development. It is completely different there now. Involving the Haitian people and the Haitian government, yes, I think it's doable. It's going to be difficult with the government, but that's where I think the UN comes in and can work alongside in rebuilding ministries. So there are lots of lessons that we know. Now, the role of the private sector and lessons there. For us, the issue on the private sector in the immediate response time is if you don't already have a partnership, it's not the best time to form one. If the company isn't already in that country, it's not a great time to start. We've had some very good partnerships actually with the private sector. I mean, even the last week, British Airways has been flying out all our water kit out very helpfully, but more specifically on the ground. I can think of Unilever with the Pakistan IDPs and I think in Sri Lanka too, providing non-food items and providing the logistics to get them there. But that was because we knew Unilever, but Unilever also knew the country. So my lesson is, if you're not there, don't start now. But the real time for the private sector to come in these disasters is in the recovery phase. That's really when the private sector can really help and really take off. But again, it's got to do it in the right way. That linking with the local governments, local people, and from our point of view, making sure that what's done is done for the poorest of the people. That the schools are put in the right places for the poorest. That there is real listening to what really needs to happen. There's also good practice about saying construction. Not bringing your own workers in, but using local staff, and not just using them as workers, but skilling them up, leaving something behind, the building back better. And perhaps most importantly for us, because in most of these poor countries, agriculture is still the basis of the economy, it is actually helping rebuild agriculture. And again, we've seen that with companies in Sri Lanka, with the displaced people there and people returning. A company there called Plenty Foods that we work with actually provided food, seeds and technical support to the people going back to their homes to help them really get started in agriculture. And actually, we need to get agriculture going again in Haiti. So there's plenty of scope for what the private sector can do, but I think it's often about holding that wonderful, heartfelt empathy just for a moment and thinking through in the business sense about, okay, what can we really do? And then how can we, if we're not there, how can we really partner with people who are deeply in and on the ground so that when we apply those things that we've got, skills, logistics systems, whatever it is we've got, do it in a way that adds into this whole coordinated system that we'll be trying to deliver and run through in the next few years. Because this is, as we all know, 10 years was talked about at the conference on Monday, but it's 10 years when actually this could make a huge and superb difference to Haiti. And I keep looking at OCHA, and it's unbelievable what's happened there. Absolute horrors at the beginning, remember, on that December the 26th, but going there now, it is really a truly different place, and many people have got out of poverty as a result.
Back to that, Josette, share yesterday, said something like there were 12,000 NGOs working in the aftermath of the tsunami, and was just expressing caution about tugboat overload, we might call it. Do you have a view on that and how it can be managed?
Yeah, well, I do actually. I think it's back to we've got to get better organised in advance with countries. And actually, it's something the Red Cross has been doing, is trying to do. It's not as much about keeping people out quite as actually assisting those who really can help quickly and urgently by having some of the legal agreements about what can get through customs and so on, and having particular agencies, I mean, a number of them, but really signed off so that they can really get on and get the work done quickly. Yeah.
We're going to come back to the cluster system, which you mentioned in passing, which is really about coordination. I just want to bring everybody else in for a second first, Cameron, forgive me, and I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Just to say to you that if you didn't pick it up on the way in, you pick it up on the way out. The challenge paper produced by the Global Agenda Council, which covers a lot of these themes, and the 2 pages. But also I wanted to point you to the joint guidelines published by the World Economic Forum and the UN, guiding principles for public-private collaboration for humanitarian action. And you'll find in there a lot of the points that have been made about the importance of building on preparedness, about listening to people, about building for reconstruction. And I know that Bill Clinton is giving a session with Klaus Schwab, I think later on this morning, which is calling for private sector involvement, not so much in the relief phase, but in building the supply chains and getting livelihoods up and running. Cameron, do you want to come in very quickly before I go to the rest of the participants?
Well, I do want to kind of come in with this. Actually, it's not the tugboats; it's more like the dinghies, which is the kind of the we used to call them suitcase NGOs, because they literally would show up with $50,000 in a briefcase and say, "What can I do to help?" Which caused massive problems. The thing about collaborating is what happens in a disaster is you have a really great organization on the ground that deals with 1 or 2 specific things. So certainly in India, we were working with LEAD, whose focus was on women's and girls' empowerment, as well as health and human services. But because they were really mobilized, they found themselves starting to do everything else. And so the mission creep of existing NGOs needs to be kind of put in check, because you end up doing everything. And with NGOs being kind of collaborative and working together, you can say, look, this is what we do, and that's it. That's all we're going to do. You know, we provide architecture and construction services. We're not going to go into the healthcare business. And so I think you're right. We worry about a lot of NGOs coming in. But if there's kind of a database system that we can all connect, and we figure out, look, I'm in Jacmel and I need design services, there's going to be someone there. The problem is that when we're all running around with our heads cut off.
Anybody wants to come and see me with a suitcase with $50,000, I'll leave you my business card. Say something about clusters, because that's all about coordination, isn't it?
Okay. Just on back to your point about 1,200 NGOs in the tsunami response. In Haiti at the moment, it's about 500. So just by that alone, I think we've organized ourselves a lot better, in the last 5 years. And in the last 5 years, what the international community humanitarian community has done is to organize itself around an architecture called the clusters. It's just jargon, but basically is those people who work in similar set of activities should come together in the cluster to do the planning together, to do your fundraising together, to plan out what you're going to do together. And then you then link up together to form a whole humanitarian country team. At this point in Haiti, there are 12 clusters activated in Haiti, and just to name a few, the health cluster. So all of the agencies working in the health area would get together, shelter, protection, etc. So that's the way we have been organizing ourselves. And in fact, this is one time when we really see a lot of value out of this. I mean, we've seen it in previous disasters since tsunami, since we have rolled out the cluster system. But this time, one particular value that we have seen is during the tsunami, everybody came out of the woodwork and say, I want to help. So you have got, say, pharmaceutical companies come and saying, like we want to donate drugs. You have telecommunications companies come and say, I want to donate this kind of services, whatever. There was no way 5 years ago for us to sort all of that out, and most of it actually didn't get taken up, largely because we had no way of engaging. Now, when that happens, the first thing we say to them is, medical supplies, this is the health cluster. The lead agency is WHO. The contact number is this person. You talk to that person first to see if what the cluster has indicated as the health need of the population at the moment and what sort of medical supplies is in need at the moment and what's not needed. If we can have a match, that will be great. So that in itself has been a huge improvement, and we have actually put a lot of order into just all of these, at the moment, ad hoc contribution that during the tsunami just flooded us, and we just didn't know how to deal with it.
Very good. There are lots of things we all agree on. You know, Haiti is terrible. We must respond. We need cash. We need to rebuild livelihoods. We need to work together. We need to build back better. I want to hear from you what you've heard that you disagree with, and what you haven't heard that's missing in this conversation. And here are the rules of engagement. I'm going to take as many of you as I can. Stand up, say who you are, say something interesting, don't ask a question, say something, and sit down again. And let's try and get 10, 15, 20 people participating. So catch my eye, but we'll start over here. There's a microphone behind you.
Hi, my name is Joel Solanicchio. I'm a physician and epidemiologist. Used to be with the CDC and done a lot of disaster response with CDC, Red Cross, IFRC, and IRC, and responded to the tsunami, among other things. So as a physician in the tsunami, I was shocked by the number of deaths, the number of dead bodies. As an epidemiologist, I was shocked by the fact that no one was really measuring anything. So we've talked, for example, about how some responses are better, like China is better, this is better. But what I want to know is exactly in what way are we saying it's better, since we're not measuring, and we're not defining metrics like what percentage of people at 6 months, 12 months, etc., have homes, permanent homes. We're not defining. In the tsunami, no one had any idea, and no one still has any idea what the total number of deaths were, even that gross measure. No one has any idea what percentage of people in the tsunami died in the event, meaning in the 2 hours or 3 hours of the event, and what percentage died in the next day and in the week after, etc. These are important metrics to determine how well we're doing.
And just then tell me this. I mean, two things. What do we have to do? And would you write it down and send it to us, and we can circulate it and make it available to all those interested?
Well, you know, in epidemiology, and I'm told in business, we say what matters gets measured. So I think what we have to do is, one, decide we want to measure things, decide what those things are, and then assign in advance the people, the money, the materials that will be focused on exactly measuring that. Now, keeping in mind that one of the reasons that we don't measure things is because many times people don't want to be evaluated, at least not on a in that kind of a way. I think you have to make it some sort of independent body.
Okay, we're going to come back and ask you whether you agree with these suggestions. Jasmine Whitbread, Chief Executive of Save the Children. About this kind of issue in Afghanistan also.
Hi, thank you. Just building on the last comment, I think, yes, measuring, but also standards. What is, compared to what is good? What does good look like? And there are a set of standards in humanitarian response called the Sphere Humanitarian Standards, which a lot of you know about, but I think perhaps we haven't shared more widely beyond the sector. But also they came out of long-term chronic emergencies, and perhaps those need to be expanded to cope with actually adding in, what's the timeframes that are expected. Of course, every situation is different. I think, you'd have to bear that in mind. But also thinking about, what's really come out in Haiti and often comes out in these sudden emergencies is what happens to children. And this whole very hot topic about, I see a lovely kid on the TV, and there's lots of talk in the UK at least, and I think the States as well, about scooping these children up and taking them away and looking after them. And we know from years of experience what the right thing to do is, which of course is to try and reunite those children as quickly as possible with their families. But instead of, as Barbara was saying, when you try to have these debates in the heat of the moment, it's almost impossible. So setting standards about what good practice is ahead of the time, these things happen all the time, I think would help move us on.
The television narrative in the UK, at least, which is we all failed, because we weren't there feeding 2 million people in 24 hours.
Yeah, I think the trouble is the media always wants an angle. I actually saw Mark Thompson, the head of the BBC, the other day, and he said, off the record, he said, I think we've been a bit over... Well, he wouldn't mind me saying this, but he said in an informal situation, an informal situation is what I mean by off the record. He said, you know what, perhaps we've been too critical, we being the journalists have been too critical, because exactly the point about compared to what? We say that it's day 5 and aid's still not flowing through, but, and then I said, well, yeah, and there was a little bit of snow in London the other day and not much got through at all. So, what are our standards? What do we expect? So I think the media, would also benefit from that discussion on standards.
So actually, standards with the timeline.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Let's go there, then we'll come to the front.
Hi, I'm Nigel Chapman, CEO of Plan International. Been working in Haiti for some 30 years, so we're not a tugboat NGO. I also used to be director of the World Service. And can I just say I agree with you? I think some of the media coverage has been too harsh, hasn't taken into account the really, really difficult circumstances that people are facing. But I just wanted to move us on to the issue of children, not so much the issue of adoption or not, which has been much debated, and I agree with you about that, but also about the long-term effect on children. And I haven't heard a lot of talk about how we're going to deal with that, the traumatic long-term effect, not just in terms of the buildings and the schools, which is a physical issue, but the mental impact on the children and the people and their parents. And that's a really big issue, I think, and one that we have to work very hard at. The other thing I'd say, finally, is this elision you talked about between being a humanitarian agency and a disaster agency. The reason why there's an elision is because if you work in a place for 30 years, you have obligations to those people. You can't just turn around to the people you've been working with for 30 years and say, I'm sorry, I don't really help you when there's a disaster. I only help you when it's relatively tranquil here, and I'll build you the school, or supply you the teacher, or work with you to develop the educational standards. It's not good enough, and that's why the two have got to come together, and I really heartily endorse the point you make.
Do the NGOs have any problem with the military being so heavily involved in this? Actually, it's been fascinating because in the UK papers there's been a whole debate about Afghanistan, where the NGOs have issued a report this week saying the military are far too involved in handing out services to people in Afghanistan. Either of you want to comment on that, as the microphone is in your vicinity?
I think in a way it's similar to what we've been talking about here in terms of different, the government, private sector and NGOs, large, small, all having their areas of expertise, and the military do military operations really well. And, when you've had a great big disaster like in Haiti or in Pakistan, for example, in Pakistan, the government did a great job in terms of using the military for what the military was good at, but drawing the line and not getting into that elision and feeling that, the military is the right body to be handing out aid, which then turns aid into, which should be impartial and, given on the basis of need. The danger with the military getting involved is by definition, that no longer will be perceived to be the case, and it will be politicised, which in turn becomes hugely, and why there's such big focus on Afghanistan at the moment, hugely dangerous for the NGOs and the local population, who then get all classed together in the same optic of the local population, along with the military.
Dr. Abdullah, before I come to you, a former foreign minister of Afghanistan, presidential candidate, of course, somebody who knows about the difficulty of state building in a context of a large relief and humanitarian effort.
Thank you. And in fact, in 1999, there was a big earthquake in Afghanistan, in northern Afghanistan. I arrived there 2 days after, but that happened. But that's just to give you an example. The estimate of the number of deaths at that time was around 5,000. But I was in London when I heard that there was an earthquake. The first thing that I went to BBC and had an interview with Lise Doucet. But at the same time, there was a member of NGO, which was in another part of Afghanistan, a very famous NGO. She challenged what I said and said that they are exaggerating these numbers in order to get more support. We don't know. She was in the furthest part of Afghanistan and challenged what had come right from the spot. But anyway, I got to where I went, and there the local population from the surrounding areas were the first to arrive there, the first people to arrive there, and with bread on the back of donkeys, with a little bit, some quilt, something. So they were the first people to be able to respond to that. And ironically, also there was, I took a group of journalists with me because there were no aid workers. And we crossed the Oxus River on the barges and went there. And Alan Little did an interview, and he said that we are all here, journalists. We are all aid workers. Yes? And the same aid worker, which had done an interview, arrived 3 days later and asking me for a shelter in that area. So sometimes listening to the locals will help better. And the problem which we were facing at that time, that all NGOs which were working for Afghanistan, they were based in Pakistan. And then this area was isolated because it was in the front line. The other side was Taliban, and Taliban were not allowing anything to cross. So that was a very complex situation that we are faced with. And then we didn't know, one day they said that there are overflies, and then they dropped something from the air. And it had nearly led to further casualties on the ground because, so listening to the locals and using the local knowledge and what's available there and being prepared for that, that will make a big change, I think.
Two more very quick ones, and then we need to make sure we come back to the panel. And then I'm going to ask you to vote on a couple of things towards the end of the session, please.
Yes. My name is Jared Genzer. One issue that hasn't been raised yet relates to the legal foundation that needs to be laid in Haiti to rebuild it actually effectively. My law firm is committed to doing a fair amount of pro bono legal work over the next couple of years to assist the UN and the government of Haiti, and we need to figure out how that would most effectively work. But when you look at issues like land tenure, you've had this entire country destroyed and probably most of the land records buried under piles of rubble, right? How do you decide who's able to live where? I mean, before you start reconstructing houses, you need to figure that out. What kind of building codes do you need for not just the Haiti of today, but as Cameron said, the Haiti of 50 years from now? How do you have a structure in place that appropriately attracts foreign investment? How do you deal with environmental laws? All of this stuff, if you don't get it right up front, is going to be a major problem down the road. And you also have a political dynamic, which hasn't been mentioned yet as well, which has to do with the fact that we've got upcoming parliamentary and presidential elections in Haiti. And how do you, in that context, deal with the Haitian government having to change a host of these different kinds of laws to address them?
Two more quick ones, yes, please. You first, and then
Hi, Neil Kenny Guy of Mercy Corps. 2 days ago, I was in Haiti, but I would just want to make a couple very quick points to reinforce what Dr. Ghani said. I mean, there's two principles we know for sure, which is that those most impacted are always the best agents of their own recovery. And despite all the rhetoric of the aid community, and Mercy Corps is right there, we sometimes don't practice that as fully as we can. I mean, the first aid responders here were the Haitian peoples themselves before the aid community got organized. You know, they were helping each other. The first thing that recovered and started were street vendors who were all out that represent local markets. And that's the second principle, that to the degree that you can restore local markets, then you have a much faster recovery and the quality tends to be much higher. So I get a little worried when I hear about all of the sanitation kits, all of the things and materials that are being assembled to be distributed that are going to flood into local markets right now. It is a traumatized situation, but that's something we have to be extremely careful about. Then the final point is just don't underestimate the challenges of standing up the Haitian government right now. It's been virtually incapacitated. But we're already at the stage where, you know, the decisions being made in terms of aid have political implications. The international community cannot take those prudently or wisely or sustainably without the real engagement of the Haitian government.
Hi. I'm Annie Sparrow. I now work for UNICEF Somalia. And I used to be involved in a lot of emergencies, and I wanted to just raise, and I'm sorry if it's already been addressed because I was 10 minutes late, but the whole issue of cash in emergencies. Because so often, when I used to deal with emergencies, and I remember vividly in East Timor, we make all these decisions about the provision of food, and WFP came in with bags and bags of corn, and nobody had any idea how to eat corn, so they fed it all straight to the pigs. And a lot of what we were doing was just damage control because we didn't actually, and we still don't. And I know it sounds very, benefit of hindsight, etc. But we would give out all the NFI, all the non-food items, and then you would find that people would sell them, because actually the most important thing was to go and actually bury your dead with dignity. So, and this made me think very hard, because at the time I was living in Kenya, and we were all, we all have staff responsible. We have to give them food bags every month. And I went off to East Timor, and we're having these arguments about whether to give them cash so they can bury their dead, or whether we should give them food, or whether they can just, give them the cash and they can buy the food, because they know how to get it better than we do. And they can access it better. And then we won't have these horrible truck and chuck efforts, which is so humiliating. And we can, have to think of ways where they can address and overcome the humiliation shame of not being able to bury your dead decently. And I just wanted to, throw that piece out there, because that's not been satisfactorily resolved, how we deal with cash in emergencies.
Do you think that there should be... this is a very difficult area, because it's quite hard to see how you could have fed a large urban population in Port-au-Prince without bringing in, ready-to-eat meals and biscuits from Mexico and outside food supplies. How do we then... is that true? Do you agree with that? And if either way, how do we then rebuild the markets and get the local rural areas in Haiti supplying the capital city?
Yeah, I don't have the answers. I just see it. I've swapped now from emergencies back to development, and frankly now I'm going to give up and go back to being a paediatrician. Somalia is too hard, but it's that balance, because we make all these presumptions too, and it's true. Of course, people need to be fed in the first aftermath. They are starving, but at the same time, we prioritise their level of needs, and we do have the standards. We've had Sphere around for years and years and years. It's not like Sphere is a new thing. Only in every emergency, it seems to get forgotten. And sometimes you're just doing damage control, because you have the NGOs who come in, and you're just trying to actually make sure they don't make the problem worse, and then you get nations like sending tons and tons of tin milk, which is just going to be a disaster. And so I'm sorry, I don't have any, it's terrible balance, because if I find that too. If you give people the cash, then they have a lot more ability to decide how to spend it in order to address their own needs, and they know there usually still is food around.
Good. Team, this is a sympathetic audience, and you haven't been attacked for depending on the military, for not violently attacked anyway, for doing the wrong kind of relief, for being too many NGOs. But there are some challenges embedded in this conversation about the standards, about measurement, about the kind of relief we're providing, about how we manage the media. Let's go in reverse order. Take a couple of minutes each, but not more, and then we want to come back to the audience and see what conclusions we can draw. So, Barbara, would you go first?
Yeah, well, let's go back to the measurement question, because I do think that's a really important one. And I think part of the answer is back to the clusters, because they are looking at particular areas where you can actually have some measures that we would all sign up to and say, yes, that is what we're measuring within that cluster. The measures, though, are much easier at the very early stages when you are doing direct service delivery. It is not hard for us in Oxfam to know how many people we provided how much water to in, say the first week or something. It's not hard to find out how many latrines were built. Those are relatively easy to get. When you come on to the 6 months, a year, though, how many people's livelihoods were restored, figuring that out is pretty complicated and requires, much more detailed evaluation, and it's harder to get just simple measures on. But I think you're right to challenge. I think that's one of the things that we're all sort of on the case on, because we know it's not good enough, where we are. Couple of points on other things. The legal stuff and the land things. Yeah, in some of the evaluation actually reports on tsunami, which there were hundreds, I have to say, one of the things that did come out was don't try to solve everything all at once, very fast. Sometimes you're going to have to do intermediate things. And that was particularly true about the shelter issue, where in the efforts to get people, there was a sort of real pull and push about, you don't want people under the blue sheeting anymore. But equally, you can't get them into permanent housing because you haven't got the land tenure sorted out. And everybody was being challenged about why you hadn't got more houses built and everything, in just the same way as, pressure now. And I think there's issues about what can you do as an intermediate response, and expecting, and it might be, the schools and the clinics just for the hurricane season, but it might be actually temporary housing that is not the permanent thing, though you have to worry that then people sometimes keep permanent things as they did in the UK from the war, and there are still them around nowadays. But, you've got to think what's the right thing at the right phase. And the last one I'll mention is this cash thing. I think, it has moved on enormously, actually, on the issues about cash. you're right, Simon, in saying, again, it's about phasing. In the first few days, if there isn't any food there, then get some food there. But then, at the same time, really start thinking, where can that food come from? Is it in the rest of the country? Can it be brought from another part? Does it have to come in from the region? But then going on to this issue about if there is a market starts again, then giving people cash is absolutely fine. And I think a lot of agencies are now doing that much, much more, both as an immediate cash payment, for a social welfare benefit, actually, for a short-term period. We do it quite often with 6-week periods and so on. But equally, giving people cash grants to get their businesses set up again. Again, we found in the tsunami that was fantastically helpful. Plus the cash for work stuff. I mean, we're paying people to do this latrine digging now. That gets money into the system again. So I don't think we're quite as averse to cash as it used to be the case 10 years ago. But knowing exactly, again, what you should do when is, I think it's people are working that through.
Very good. Thank you very much. Cameron.
Naturally, I should be just talking about housing and buildings and architecture, but the one thing that I want to bring up that we haven't talked about is the value of digital inclusion within the situation. What's really fascinating is that a fast-moving response, when we talked about the first responders, were the Haitians, is every single one of them had a cell phone. And OCHA, which was a crowdsource project in Kenya dealing with where was the violence in the election. It was a Kenyan-based group that used cell phones, GPS tracking to know reports of where violence was. They did the same in the Congo about emergencies. They were set up in Haiti very quickly, and they're getting thousands of reports, geotagged, live, knowing where things are, where they're needed, and people helping each other, between each other. So in a way, and I hate to use this phrase because I hate it so much, which is a Web 2.0 kind of post-disaster situation, is that you have the ability to do microfinancing through credit through cell phones. We have 4 million Haitian diaspora in the United States, all with a cell phone that you can connect with people on the ground. And so there needs to be a grid, a smart grid in Haiti that will allow for distribution, not just of financing, but, why the heck isn't the Sphere guidelines, on a Kindle, right? Every NGO is coming down with their technology. Why isn't it updated on the fly? I mean, we should be able to, the idea of shipping in books of knowledge to every NGO is just waste, just more paper. So I think utilizing digital inclusion not only in responding to, how do we deal with the lack of teachers in schools? How are we going to integrate? And OCHA is a good example where we originally were going to start doing schools, and it turns out that the projects we needed to do was teacher training colleges because they had lost 50% of their teachers. So, these cause and effects, and understanding that data allows you to make that decision. So I think we're fortunate that there are a lot of kind of open source solutions, both in solutions to financing. But the other thing is, I actually think it's criminal that NGOs treat solutions as proprietary. I mean, if your work is about social change and a commitment to humanitarian aid, everything should be open source. We should know how you're working, how things are working, and how they're not working. Because, if I look at Save the Children, they've got some amazing schools they've been doing in Sierra Leone. Well, and we're working in nearby Liberia, we may see a school and say, oh, we should replicate that, not knowing. Right. But what needs to happen is we've all got our own little systems. We've all got our own social networks, and we've all got our own systems where they are. What we need to do is be able to cross-reference in a way so that I can instantly see what all the educational NGOs are doing and how we can support them and how we could not step on their feet because they're already doing this work.
Cameron,
right?
Thank you. I love disagreement, but not at 6 minutes before the end of the session. Forgive me. Talk about it afterwards. Madam Agata.
The role of the military is what you asked. I think there's innate hesitance to ask the military to do humanitarian kind of work. So in my country, when we had the big earthquake in Kobe, there were people or the local autonomy officials were rather slow in asking for the coming of the self-defense forces. But now I think that kind of hesitancy has been overcome, and for the first big emergency natural disasters, I think the military and the police and the fire engine corps, they tend to be very, very useful in the early phases of moving people, moving things away and rescuing and so on. But on the whole, humanitarian agencies, including what I used to do, we didn't want the military to come around too much. And we did not find them unless they were well trained and well understood their role. Engineering corps is very, very helpful for reconstruction, I think. But for emergency, they are useful. But there has to be much better communication and understanding on the part of the military as well as the people.
Where you can be seen to take sides.
Yes.
Yeah.
War zones, natural disasters in war zones are really very, very bad. But I just wanted to give credit to what OCHA is doing in this natural disaster part, that you are really getting all the standards set up in order to make sure that those who participate are of certain standards that can be met. And also you give information on who is available and what is needed and all that kind. And I hope OCHA and the UN can really maintain that very, very helpful role for everybody, NGOs.
I would like to follow your comments regarding the participation of the private and public sector. What you just mentioned about the Army, especially in our country, has made a very, very good job. And I would mention also the work that has been done lately in this Haiti problem with our First Lady. You need someone to coordinate this. They are the ones that set the priorities. And the other thing that has been said here in the public also is the networks, the people at the site where we work in construction or whatever. They are the people that really know how to handle the problems. We have the funds, we have the equipment in the engineering and construction. But what I'm saying, I think it's essential also to have a specific where to work. In Haiti, for example, what we're doing right now, when it's a strike there, we said, where should we work? And we found out that there were 2 hospitals and 1 orphanage where we should work. So when you focus things, you go directly to it, and you will come up with a much better solution that just don't know where to invest or where to put the money, because the reaction, it's enormous. Where do we put the money that we get from our companies, from this funding? Well, we get it, and then we put it in a specific, and I show them after 2 or 3 years, as what happened in Mexico in the Tabasco floods, we show them what we have done in the past. And this is something very important in the private sector to show, and I think anywhere, to show where your investments are going to. Thank you.
As you just round up this discussion, I asked you earlier on, what happens if there's more than one emergency? And you started telling me about how OCHA is capable of managing 3 catastrophes at once. Just perhaps explain to people how that works, among other things you want to say.
Well, actually, it is not much to explain. And we do have both the early detection capability, we have the first responder capability, and all of that is in place. I think I'd much rather spend my remaining minute that I'm allowed to address three very quick points. The first one is in terms of the cash. In the appeal for Haiti, the $575 million appeal from the UN agencies with quite a number of NGOs. In that, there's a $45 million appeal from UNDP for cash for work. And what we're doing there is that the plan is to hire 100,000 Haitians at $5 a day to help with things such as clearing the rubbles, helping with the rebuilding, helping with distribution of relief items, so that they get work, they get the dignity of work, they get some cash in the pockets, they can revitalize the market. That's what is important. So for those few of you in the private sector in the audience who's thinking of how you write your check, please consider that as one of your options, because I think it is so important that we actually do that. Second point is in terms of the government. Madam Ogata mentioned that there is a difference in terms of how you engage the government in development versus humanitarian response. But I hasten to add that all international humanitarian response should be in support of the government. And we carry that as an approach. And my sentiment is more with the gentleman from Mariscal in terms of needing to shore up this current government, which is fairly weak before the disaster, and because of the disaster has lost huge capacity, not just in terms of its leadership, but also in the civil service. The civil servants have suffered incredible loss. Their offices and their files have been destroyed. It's very difficult for them to get back on their feet. We need to help them with that. And I think it will be a real mistake in both our relief and recovery and development to sideline the government of the day, regardless of where we are, and particularly in Haiti. Last point is, I know Haiti always seems to everybody as a basket case, and it's always bad news. I'd like to end on a more positive note. I totally agree with Cameron and with Barbara on the importance of disaster risk reduction, but let me just give you one illustration of how Haiti itself actually is a learning country. In 2004, a tropical storm, not even hurricane status, not even hurricane category 1, tropical storm passed through Gonaïves, which is the northern part of Haiti, for those who know the geography, caused immense mudslide and landslide and killed 2,000 people. It then went over to Dominican Republic and nobody died. By the time we reached Dominican Republic, that storm was a category 1 and no one died, okay? In 2008, 4 years later, 4 hurricanes hit Haiti in the western part, not the same area, in the western part. Total number of deaths out of the 4 hurricanes was a few hundred people. That's because it has engaged the country, both from the government level, from the community level, from the individual level, have engaged in disaster risk reduction and preparedness. The community knows what to do when there is warning for hurricanes. They have shelters to get people. And as we know, you get people out of harm's way, they don't die. It's about as simple as that.
Thank you. Sorry to rush you. We're supposed to stop. I want to ask you 2 questions and ask you to vote to see whether we get to conclusions. The first question is, I'm going to ask you whether you're optimistic or pessimistic about the scaling up of the relief effort in Haiti. Put up your hands if you're, from what you've heard today, optimistic. Put up your hands if you're pessimistic. Not everybody agrees, but there is a sense that the relief effort is coming together, and I think that a number of you have spoken very strongly about the lessons that have been learned and how they're being applied. Let me ask you a final question. This is a topic in which, under Olivia's leadership, the World Economic Forum has invested a good deal of effort in trying to bring the parties together and build new partnerships. I want to ask you whether you think this is an area in which the World Economic Forum should continue to invest, building public-private partnerships in disasters. Put your hands up if you think it should. Put your hands up if you think it shouldn't. That's the right answer. Well done. Thank you very much. Davos discussions work well when the audience is as expert as the panel. We've had a really good hour. Thank you all very much.